Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Gaudette, and welcome back to another installment of Top 5 Albums, the series where I walk you through my 5 favorite albums from every year. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the year 1992, and this was a seriously stacked year for albums. I was blown away at how many classic records came out of this year, and not only that, but there were also so many great lesser-known deep-cut records that I think were equally as strong, and a lot of bands that were established in the mid to late 80s are really starting to release some of the best music of their entire discography. And it was another year that just had a creative explosion within all styles of music and produced so many countless classic albums. And it took a lot of thought and a lot of re-listens to really solidify what my top 5 favorite albums are for this particular year. But after a lot of careful thought, I have arrived at my top 5 list. So without further ado, here are my top 5 favorite albums of 1992, starting with number 5. Coming in at number 5 is Dirty by Sonic Youth. This is yet again another incredible record from the Sonic Youth discography. This would be their 7th studio album, and it is just so amazing that they are still releasing such high quality music this far into their discography, especially when you take into consideration some of the albums that preceded it, like Evol, Sister, Daydream Nation, and Goo. And I think on this record, they did a really great job of taking everything that was awesome about Goo and continuing to build off of it, adding some more grungy elements, as well as adding a third guitar, and this would be the first time in their discography where they would do that. I love the production on this. I think it's a further improvement from Goo. I think everything on here sounds really clean and crisp, and it was actually produced by Butch Vig, who is most notably known for producing the Nirvana album Nevermind. And this was an interesting time for this group. There was definitely some tension that was building, and it was largely due to the fact that the album was originally meant to be 18 tracks long, but Geffen made them trim it down a bit, and they chose to omit a song by guitarist Lee Ranaldo, which caused a lot of tension within the group. So they ended up trimming the album down to 15 tracks, and they just take you through this amazing and intense 1 hour long journey with one amazing song after the next. I really love the dynamic between Thurston Moore and Kim Gordon on this, doing a great job of showcasing both of their vocal capabilities and how they complement each other. Kim Gordon has some seriously hard-hitting and badass tracks on here, but also has a couple of more mellow and chill tracks, which balance things out very nicely. Then on the flip side with Thurston Moore, we have these tracks that do a great job of showcasing his hard rock and punk influences. So in terms of the vocal work between Kim and Thurston, I think they do a really great job of balancing each other out and giving the listener a little bit of every flavor that is part of the Sonic Youth sound. For favorite songs on here, I would have to go with Sugarcane, Teresa's Sound World, Wish Fulfillment, Chapel Hill, and JC, which is one of my personal favorite Kim Gordon songs from a lyrical standpoint. It's just an amazingly poetic and very gripping song to listen to. And yeah, I cannot say enough good things about this record. I think Sonic Youth was on fire at this point, and I would say from the period of 1986 to 1992, I think Sonic Youth had one of the strongest sets of album releases of any band of that period. And as far as their full discography goes, this would be my 4th favorite album of theirs. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on their entire discography, I did a video ranking all of their studio albums, so be sure to check that out in the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description if you are interested. Alright, that is my number 5 album. Now on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is In Ribbons by Pale Saints. This is my personal favorite record to come from this relatively short-lived alternative rock and shoegaze band from England. And most people regard their previous album, The Comforts of Madness, to be their best record, but I've always resonated with this one a little bit more. On this album, we get the addition of Mariel Barham, which I think further enhanced their sound and provided this really nice contrast of male and female-fronted vocal tracks, very similar to what I said on the previous record, talking about Sonic Youth. And every single song that is sung by Mariel on here I think is a home run and really further enhanced the Pale Saints sound and delved into even more unexplored territories. This album is 12 tracks long, and from front to back I think it is spectacular, and there are so many interesting characteristics to these songs between the very colorful chord progressions and vocal melodies, the tasteful and technical drum grooves, and the odd time signatures. And we hear that right from the opening track with Throwing Back the Apple, which is a spectacular way to kickstart start this record. And then from that point on, we get a really nice blend of different moods. We get some songs that are more similar to the vibe from their previous record, The Comforts of Madness, but we also get a couple of more ambient and stripped down tracks, and we also get the Muriel Barham vocal features like I had mentioned. And all of these added components make for an album that I think is an even further improvement from where they were at on the previous record, and it just makes for a very fun, enjoyable, and dynamic listen. My favorite tracks on here would be Thread of Light, Liquid, Baby Maker, and Hunted. And of all of the Pale Saints albums and EPs, this one would definitely contain the largest amount of my favorite tracks by them. I do not think there is one skip over track on here. Everything that they do is spectacular. And like I said, they have a relatively short discography with only 3 studio albums and a couple of EPs, all of which I think are well worth checking out. This is one of the lesser known bands to come out of the late 80s and early 90s, but for the very short period that they were together, they really left their mark on shoegaze and alternative rock music, and they left us some albums that I think will forever be timeless. And if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on their discography, I did a video ranking all of their studio albums and EPs, so be sure to check that out in the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description if you are interested. Alright, that is my number 4 album. Now on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Angel Dust by Faith No More. This is my personal favorite Faith No More record, and a lot of other people agree with that sentiment. I think musically, this is their most interesting material, and it contains the largest amount of my favorite tracks by them. This would be their 4th studio album, and the first record to feature Mike Patton contributing to the songwriting, and I think that was a very positive addition and really transformed their sound for the better. Stylistically, they branch out much more on this record in comparison to anything else that they had done up to this point, with lots of interesting twists and turns from track to track, but still writing stuff that is within that metal foundation that is such a staple to the Faith No More sound. I really love the way that they mix guitars and keyboards together. That's an instrumental pairing that you don't typically see as often in this kind of music, and I think they do it exceptionally well, especially on this record. And I think Mike Patton's vocal work sounds much more refined and dynamic in comparison to the album before. He's really doing it all on here, between the melodic singing, the low deep singing, the whispering, the yelling, and the metal screaming. The album is 13 tracks long, and it takes the listener through this very adventurous journey of lots of different moods, with a couple of tracks that have more of a sort of cinematic feel to them, as well as a nice selection of alternative and thrash metal tracks, and a couple of tracks that are doing more of that funk and metal sort of hybrid. And we also get one song that's sort of in a category of its own with the track RV, which to me is a very clear precursor to the Mr. Bungle sound, and I love that we hear that so early within this Faith No More discography, and it really showcases the brilliance of Mike Patton. And one of my personal favorite elements to this record is Mike Patton's vocal melodies. There's a lot of really unorthodox things going on within these melodies. Oftentimes he'll start singing a couple of notes that are a little bit more normal sounding, and then it lands on this note that's really tense and dissonant and really throws the listener off, and I absolutely love moments like that. Anytime there's a musical moment that just catches your ear and takes you into some territory that you didn't expect, I think those are some of the best moments in all of music, and there are so many moments like that throughout this record on tracks like Everything's Ruined and Kindergarten, and those actually both happen to be my 2 favorite songs from this record. And if I had to pick a couple of others, I would go with Midlife Crisis, RV, and Smaller and Smaller. And when it comes to alternative metal albums to come out of the 90s, I think this is easily one of the best ones of the entire decade, and it is hands down my favorite Faith No More record. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on their entire discography, I did a video ranking all of their studio albums as well, so be sure to check that out in the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description if you are interested. Alright, that is my number 3 album. Now on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is Dirt by Alice in Chains. This is one of the greatest grunge albums of all time, in my opinion, and a further improvement from their previous record, both from a production and songwriting standpoint, giving us this awesome blend of that grunge and metal sort of hybrid that they had established on the previous release, but also veering off into some more mellow territories on certain tracks. And they do it in a way that sounds very dynamic, but also has a really great cohesiveness to it all throughout. And we get a really great demonstration of Layne Staley's very versatile vocal sensibilities. When it comes to grunge vocalists, my top two, hands down, would be Layne Staley and Chris Cornell. And when it comes to the Alice in Chains discography, I think this is Layne Staley's strongest album from a vocal standpoint. And in addition to that, I also think it is Jerry Cantrell's best guitar work of any of their records, with lots of really tasty riffs, some of which are in odd time signatures, which adds an additional layer of complexity to these tracks. The album is 13 tracks long, and from front to back, I think it is a perfect record. Not one skip over track and not one wasted moment. And this album would spawn several Alice in Chains hits, like the opening and closing tracks, Them Bones and Wood, both of which I would say are the strongest opening and closing track pairing of any grunge album. Them Bones hits you right out of the gate with this really heavy and aggressive guitar riff that just kickstarts the album with such a great energy, and then Wood provides that same sort of intensity to conclude the album with. Wood would be my number one favorite track from this album, and is definitely a contender for my number one favorite grunge song. I think that song is just absolutely perfect, with one of the most badass and hard-hitting choruses of any grunge track. And a couple of other hits that came from this record are Down in a Hole and Rooster, which shows them go into some more mellow territories with the acoustic and electric guitar hybrid, which provides some nice variety within the track listing. And not only are the hits great, but I think the B-sides are just as strong, and in some cases I like some of the B-sides even more than the hits, with my favorites being Damn That River, Sick Man, Junkhead, Godsmack, and Angry Chair, which I think is the perfect second to last track for the record and does a great job of setting up Wood beautifully. So as you can see, I do not have one negative thing to say about this record. Like I said, one of my all-time favorite grunge albums and my number one favorite Alice in Chains record. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on their entire discography, I did a video ranking all of their studio albums, so be sure to check that out in the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description if you are interested. All right, that is my number 2 album. Now for the grand reveal, here is my number 1 favorite album of 1992. All right, coming in as my favorite album of 1992 is Powers of 10 by Shawn Lane. And unless you are a guitar player, the odds are you've probably never heard of this record or heard of Shawn Lane. But this is an album that I got very heavily into when I was in high school, particularly when I was in my shred guitar phase. And Shawn Lane is a virtuoso guitar player who could play so unbelievably fast with such technical proficiency, and he is criminally underrated. And unfortunately, he is not with us anymore. He passed away in 2003, but I have noticed a little bit of a resurgence in him as of late, with a lot of YouTubers posting reaction videos to his playing, and a lot of them are pretty comical because his playing is so unbelievable, and just seeing people react to him for the first time is a pretty cool thing to actually witness. And he only put out 2 solo records within his lifetime. He did a lot of collaborations with other musicians, but as far as his solo discography goes, there's only 2 albums. This is the first one, and in my opinion, this album is the best depiction of his virtuosic abilities as both a guitarist and a keyboardist, and also a great showcase of his incredible songwriting. And I feel like I shouldn't even describe him as a shred guitarist, because I feel like there are all sorts of predisposed ideas that people have in their heads as to what a shred guitarist is, and it can kind of put you into a box. And Shawn Lane is so much more than just a shred guitar player. He's just a very well-rounded musician and a beautiful songwriter, and there's just so much more to him as a musician than just shred guitar. Of course, he could play incredibly fast and is very technically proficient, but his songwriting is equally as strong, and he has such a beautiful sense of melody, and his harmony is much more adventurous with lots of jazz and classical influences seeping in, and it really differentiates him from just about any other guitar player of that style and from that time. And when I first heard this album in high school, I became absolutely obsessed with it. I can't even count how many times I've listened to this album, and I still go back to it this day with just as much enjoyment. And that is typically not the case for me when it comes to a lot of the more guitar-heavy music that I was into when I was in high school. A lot of times I go back to it now and it sounds kind of dated, but I just never get tired of this album. It is an absolutely beautiful piece of work. And it's 11 tracks long with 10 beautiful originals and 1 cover. And throughout this track listing, he takes you through this beautiful journey of so many different emotions and feels. And as I had mentioned before, not only is Shawn Lane a virtuoso guitar player, but he is also an equally proficient piano player, and he showcases his piano chops on a couple of tracks in the second quarter of the album, with Powers of 10 Suite, Piano Concertino Transformation of Themes, and Paris. And then the remainder of the album is more guitar-centered tracks, and I think every single song on here is incredible. So many beautiful melodies, so many great guitar solos, really unique chord progressions, and just overall very unique and tasteful music that sounds unlike anything produced by any other guitar player. And if I had to pick a couple of favorites on here, I would go with Esperanto, Gray Piano's Flying, Not Again, and Get You Back. And in all honesty, the only critique that I would give this record is I don't think the production is great. It does sound like something that was done on a relatively low budget, but none of that negates the incredible songwriting and the virtuosic guitar playing on here. And Shawn Lane will forever be one of my all-time favorite guitar players and a huge influence on my playing. And if you've never heard of him, please do yourself the favor of checking out some of his YouTube videos. You will be completely blown away, and it will be unlike any guitar player you have ever heard. So that is my favorite album of 1992. And to recap, at number 5 we had Dirty by Sonic Youth. Number 4 was In Ribbons by Pale Saints. Number 3 was Angel Dust by Faith No More. Number 2 was Dirt by Alice in Chains. And number 1 is Powers of 10 by Shawn Lane. If you haven't checked out any of these albums before and you give them a listen, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. And also, please let me know what your top 5 albums of 1992 are in the comments. I would love to see your lists. All right, that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for my top 5 favorite albums of 1993. I'll see you then. Take care.